Think you know the whole story? Turns out you were probably taught the half-truth. Welcome to Half-Truths. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the Arctic. What do you see? I'm willing to bet it's a vast, unbroken expanse of white. Maybe a jagged blue crack in the ice, or the shimmering curtain of the aurora borealis in an ink-black sky. You probably hear a sound, too. The lonely howl of the wind. And perhaps, if you look closely, you see a single, majestic figure. A polar bear, standing on a solitary ice floe, a symbol of stark, beautiful, but ultimately barren isolation. This is the Arctic of our collective imagination. It's the one we learned about in school, saw in nature documentaries, and read about in tales of heroic, doomed explorers. It is a pristine, frozen desert. A place defined by its emptiness, its hostility to life, its profound and eternal silence. It's the planet's great white void at the top of the map, a place of sublime, untouchable, and sterile beauty. For generations, this has been the accepted truth. The Arctic is the world's last great wilderness, a place fundamentally empty of all but the hardiest, most specialized creatures. But what if that image, that entire concept, is built on a profound misunderstanding? What if that silent white wasteland is actually loud and seasonal and bursting with color? What if the story of an empty north is not just wrong, but dangerously wrong? Today, we're setting our compass north to confront one of the biggest and coldest half-truths on the planet. The myth that the Arctic is little more than a frozen, barren wasteland. The story we all know is a powerful one. It's a story of extremes. The coldest temperatures, the fiercest winds, the longest nights. In this telling, the Arctic is a monolithic entity. It's just ice, a static, unchanging landscape locked in a permanent winter. Life in this version is an afterthought, a miracle of survival against impossible odds. The narrative is dominated by a few key players. The polar bear is the undisputed king, a lonely monarch ruling a vast and empty kingdom. Its subjects are the seals it hunts, popping their heads through breathing holes in the ice. This is a drama of survival, pure and simple. There is the hunter and the hunted. The endless white stage on which their life or death struggle plays out. It's a compelling narrative because of its simplicity. Its nature, red in tooth and claw, set against the most elemental backdrop imaginable. We see this in films, in books, on posters for environmental causes. The single bear on the melting floe is a potent symbol precisely because it reinforces this idea of isolation. It suggests a creature alone in a vast nothingness, its entire world dissolving beneath its feet. This vision of the Arctic serves a purpose. It makes it feel distant, alien, almost like another planet. It's a place for adventurers to conquer, for scientists to endure, but not a place to live. It's a passive landscape, a backdrop. Its value in this story is its pristine emptiness, its status as a place untouched by the messiness of the world to the south. It's beautiful because it's empty, and it's empty because it's a brutal, unforgiving ice world where life simply cannot get a foothold. It's a simple, clean, and elegant story. And for the most part, it's what we've been taught to believe. But like any good half-truth, this story starts to fray the moment you begin to pull at its threads. The first thread is a simple, logical question. What does the polar bear eat? Seals, of course. Okay, what do the seals eat? Well, fish like Arctic cod. And what do the fish eat? Smaller fish. And what do they eat? Suddenly, our simple two-character drama requires a whole cast of supporting actors. Every food chain has to start somewhere. In this supposedly sterile world of ice and snow, there must be a foundation. A vast, invisible engine of life that supports the entire structure, right up to that iconic apex predator. The barren wasteland must have a secret pantry. The second thread involves how we came to see the Arctic this way in the first place. The image of the empty North wasn't born from comprehensive ecological study. It was forged in the journals of European and American explorers from the 16th to the 19th centuries. These men, Martin Frobisher, Henry Hudson, John Franklin, were not there to document biodiversity. They were on a mission. They were looking for a shortcut to the riches of Asia, the legendary Northwest Passage. For them, the Arctic wasn't a home, it was an obstacle, a monstrous white enemy to be battled and overcome. Their accounts, understandably, are filled with suffering and hardship. They wrote of ships trapped in ice for months, of unending darkness, of frostbite and starvation. They experienced the Arctic at its most brutal and unforgiving, often during the dead of winter. Their perspective was that of an outsider, from the wooden deck of a ship, staring out at a landscape that seemed determined to kill them. They described a world of dreadful, desolate ice, and their stories became the foundation of our understanding. We saw the Arctic through the eyes of men who saw it as an adversary. This image was further solidified in the 20th century. Early black and white photography and film could not capture the subtle, vibrant colors of the tundra in its brief, explosive summer. They could only show the stark contrast of black rock and white snow. And even as technology improved, nature documentaries, for logistical and narrative reasons, have often focused on the most dramatic and accessible stories, the charismatic megafauna. It's far easier and more compelling to film a polar bear hunt than it is to film the microscopic algae blooming beneath the sea ice. It wasn't a conspiracy to mislead us. It was simply a story told from a very specific and very narrow point of view. A story of survival, not of life. So let's step away from that story. Let's leave the deck of the ice-locked ship and the long lens of the camera crew and look at the Arctic as it truly is. The first thing we need to do is throw out the idea of a static, unchanging world. The Arctic is one of the most dynamic and seasonal places on the entire planet. Its defining characteristic isn't the cold, it's the light. For months in the winter, the sun never rises above the horizon. This is the polar night. But for months in the summer, the sun never sets. It circles the sky for 24 hours a day. This is the time of the midnight sun. This dramatic swing from total darkness to perpetual daylight is the engine that drives everything. It creates two completely different Arctics. The winter Arctic is the one from the myth, cold, quiet, and seemingly dormant, but it's not dead. It's waiting, and when the sun returns, the transformation is one of the most profound biological events on Earth. Let's start beneath the ice. The Arctic Ocean isn't a sterile, frigid void. As sunlight begins to penetrate the thinning ice in the spring, it triggers a massive explosion of life. Microscopic, single-celled algae that live on the underside of the sea ice and phytoplankton in the water begin to bloom in unimaginable numbers. This is the foundation. This is the secret pantry. This bloom of microscopic life forms the base of the entire marine food web. It's eaten by tiny crustaceans and zooplankton, which are then eaten by Arctic cod and other small fish. Those fish, in turn, feed the seals. And the seals, of course, feed the polar bears. But it doesn't stop there. This incredible oceanic productivity supports so much more. It supports massive bowhead whales, filter-feeding behemoths that can live for over 200 years. It supports the mysterious narwhal with its unicorn-like tusk and the sociable, vocal beluga whale. The ocean is teeming with life that is either invisible to the naked eye or hidden beneath a ceiling of ice. Now let's look at the land. The word tundra often conjures images of brown, barren ground. But for a few short months in the summer, under the 24-hour sun, the Arctic tundra undergoes a radical transformation. It bursts into color. Over 1,700 species of plants, including hundreds of species of flowering plants, emerge. There are vibrant purple saxifrages, delicate white mountain avens, and the brilliant yellow of the Arctic poppy, a flower that actually turns its head to track the sun across the sky. The ground is covered in a carpet of mosses and lichens in shades of green, orange, and red. It's not a uniform explosion, but a mosaic of life, a garden thriving in the shallow soil above the permafrost. This barren land provides a feast for a host of herbivores. This is the world of the caribou, also known as reindeer. Migrating in vast herds that can number in the tens of thousands, their hooves clicking as they move across the landscape. It is the home of the muskox, a shaggy, prehistoric-looking survivor of the last ice age, and it supports millions of smaller animals, like lemmings and Arctic hares. This abundance of prey, in turn, supports a diverse cast of predators. The Arctic fox, which trades its pure white winter coat for a brown or gray one in the summer. The Arctic wolf, a pale subspecies perfectly adapted to this environment. The elusive wolverine. And then there's the sky. The brief Arctic summer triggers one of the planet's greatest migrations. The land, temporarily free of snow and buzzing with insect life, becomes a gigantic, continental-scale nursery. Millions upon millions of birds, geese, ducks, swans, sandpipers, terns, fly from every corner of the globe to the Arctic to breed and raise their young. They come because the perpetual daylight gives them 24 hours to forage for food, and the wide-open spaces offer protection from many southern predators. The Arctic isn't an endpoint, it's a critical global hub. The sky is filled with sound and motion. It is anything but silent. Most importantly, the Arctic was never empty of people. This is perhaps the most profound omission in the myth of the barren wasteland. For at least 5,000 years, and likely much longer, the Arctic has been a homeland. It is home to the Inuit of North America and Greenland, the Sami of Scandinavia and Russia, the Yupik of Siberia and Alaska, and many other distinct indigenous cultures. These are not people who simply survive in the Arctic. They have thrived there for millennia, developing some of the most sophisticated and ingenious knowledge systems on the planet. Their cultures, languages, and spiritual beliefs are woven into the very fabric of this environment. They possess a deep, granular understanding of the sea ice, the weather patterns, the animal migrations. They know the subtle signs that mark the changing of the seasons. The Arctic was never a wasteland to them. It was, and is, a rich provider landscape. A home. The myth of an empty Arctic isn't just an ecological fallacy. It is an act of erasure, rendering invisible the peoples who have always called it home and who continue to shape its story. Finally, this place we imagine as distant and disconnected is, in fact, fundamentally linked to every single one of us, no matter where we live. The Arctic functions as the planet's refrigerator. The vast white surfaces of its ice and snow cover act like a giant mirror, reflecting the sun's energy back into space. This phenomenon, known as the albedo effect, helps to cool the entire globe and stabilize our weather patterns. The empty space at the top of the map is one of the key regulators of the planetary system that keeps our climate habitable. It is not a separate world. It is the heart of ours. So, we journeyed from a familiar, comfortable myth to a much more complex and fascinating reality. We began with a mental picture of a silent, white, and empty world, a static landscape defined by its hostility to life, a beautiful but ultimately desolate museum piece at the top of the globe, a place of splendid isolation. We discovered instead a world of dramatic seasonal change, driven by the phenomenal swing from polar night to midnight sun. We found an ocean and a landscape that pulse with a hidden, explosive life, from the microscopic algae under the ice to the millions of birds that turn the sky into a global crossroads. We found not a blank space on the map, but a homeland shaped and understood by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We found not an empty wasteland, but a vital organ of the planetary body whose health is directly tied to our own. Why does correcting this half-truth matter so much? Because the myth of the barren wasteland is a dangerous one. It makes the Arctic seem abstract, distant, and expendable. If we believe it is an empty, dead place, it becomes easier to see it as a mere repository of oil, gas, and mineral resources to be exploited. It becomes easier to watch its ice melt with a sense of detached sadness, as if we are losing a beautiful but ultimately useless landscape painting. The myth of emptiness allows us to be passive observers of its destruction. But when we see the Arctic for what it truly is, a dynamic, living, and interconnected system, a global nursery, a cultural homeland, a critical climate regulator, everything changes. We are no longer talking about an empty stage, but about a world teeming with life. A world that is inextricably linked to our own. The story of the empty Arctic made it easy to forget. The truth of a living Arctic compels us to remember. Understanding that the top of the world is not a wasteland, but a cradle of life, reminds us that what we do to the most remote parts of our planet, we ultimately do to ourselves. Now you know the real story. What other half-truths are still out there? If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us next time. Until then, stay curious.